The shrill ring of the phone pierced through the thick veil of grief that had consumed me since Derek's passing. Reluctantly, I reached for the receiver, my hand trembling with a mix of dread and curiosity. "Lila, it's Eleanor," the stern voice at the other end announced, devoid of any warmth or condolences. My heart sank as I recognized the steely tone of my late husband's mother. Even in my darkest moments, she found a way to intrude, her presence as unwelcome as ever. "What do you want, Eleanor?" I mustered, my voice strained with barely concealed contempt. "I need you to move in with me," she stated matter-of-factly, as if making a simple request for groceries. "It's your duty as a daughter-in-law to care for me now that Derek is gone." I recoiled at her audacity, anger rising within me like a tidal wave. "Are you serious? Derek just died, and you're already trying to control me? I'm not your servant, Eleanor." "Don't take that tone with me, young lady," she snapped, her words dripping with disdain. "You owe me for all the sacrifices I've made for this family." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to hurl the phone across the room. "You've done nothing but belittle and undermine me since the day I married Derek. Why should I subject myself to more of your abuse?" "How dare you speak to me like that?" Eleanor's voice rose to a shrill pitch, her rage palpable even through the receiver. "After everything I've done for you, this is the thanks I get? You ungrateful, selfish girl." "Enough," I shouted, my patience finally snapping. "I don't owe you a damn thing, Eleanor. Derek is gone, but that doesn't give you the right to dictate my life. I'm not coming to live with you, and that's final." With a defiant click, I slammed the phone down, severing the connection with a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. Eleanor's toxic grip on my life had finally reached its limit, and I was determined to break free, no matter the cost. As I sank back into the couch, tears streamed down my face, a potent mix of grief and liberation. Derek's passing had left a gaping void in my heart, but it had also presented an opportunity, a chance to reclaim my identity and free myself from the shackles of Eleanor's cruelty. The words she had hurled at me echoed in my mind, a painful reminder of the countless times she had belittled and demeaned me, even in Derek's presence. But this time, something was different. A fire had been ignited within me, a burning desire to stand up for myself and confront the demons of my past. With trembling hands, I reached for a pen and paper, determined to put my defiance into writing. Eleanor's reign of terror would end, and I would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As I set down the pen, my mind drifted back to the countless times Eleanor had made my life a living hell. Her words, sharp as daggers, had left invisible scars that ran deeper than any physical wound. One memory, in particular, resurfaced with a vengeance. It was the night Derek and I had gathered the courage to share our struggles with fertility, a moment that should have been met with compassion and understanding. "Mother, Lila and I have something to tell you," Derek had said, his voice heavy with trepidation. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval. "Well, out with it then. I haven't got all day." I swallowed hard, steeling myself for her reaction. "We've been trying to conceive for over a year now, but it hasn't been easy. The doctors say I may have issues with—" "Enough," Eleanor cut me off, her tone as cold as ice. "I don't want to hear about your feminine troubles, Lila. This is what happens when a woman puts off having children for her career." Derek's face flushed with anger, but before he could speak, Eleanor continued her tirade. "I sacrificed everything to raise my family, and this is how you repay me? By denying me the joy of grandchildren?" "Mother, that's enough," Derek snapped, but his words fell on deaf ears. Eleanor turned her withering gaze on me, her eyes burning with contempt. "Mark my words, Lila, if you can't give me grandchildren, you'll never be a true part of this family." The memory still stung like an open wound, a stark reminder of the emotional torment Eleanor had inflicted upon me. Her words had cut deeper than any knife, leaving me feeling inadequate and unworthy of Derek's love. But now, with Derek gone, Eleanor's cruelty had reached a new level of audacity. How dare she demand that I move in and care for her, as if I were her indentured servant? Anger coursed through my veins, fueling my determination to stand up to her once and for all. I would no longer cower in fear or shrink from her vile insults. With a newfound sense of resolve, I picked up the pen and began to draft a letter, a defiant declaration of my independence. Eleanor would learn that her reign of terror was over, and I would no longer be a willing participant in her twisted games. The words flowed effortlessly, each sentence a testament to my newfound strength and resilience. I would not be cowed by her demands or intimidated by her threats. This was my life, my future, and I would shape it on my own terms. As I sealed the envelope, a sense of empowerment washed over me. This was just the beginning, a simple act of defiance that would ignite a firestorm of consequences. Eleanor had underestimated me for far too long, and now she would face the wrath of a woman scorned. With a newfound determination, I slipped the letter into the mailbox, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of my life, and my relationship with the woman who had once held such power over me. Days passed with no word from Eleanor, and I began to wonder if my letter had fallen on deaf ears. Perhaps she had finally accepted my decision and resigned herself to the fact that her control over me had come to an end. That naive hope was shattered one morning when the doorbell rang with a furious cadence. Hesitantly, I approached the door, peering through the peephole to see Eleanor's seething form on the other side. Taking a deep breath, I unlatched the lock and swung the door open, bracing myself for the onslaught. "How dare you?" Eleanor spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? With disrespect and ingratitude?" I squared my shoulders, refusing to shrink from her wrath. "I owe you nothing, Eleanor. Derek is gone, and you have no claim over my life anymore." "No claim?" she seethed, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I am your mother-in-law, and you will show me the respect I deserve." "Respect?" I scoffed, my own anger rising to the surface. "You've done nothing but belittle and demean me since the day I married Derek. When have you ever shown me an ounce of respect?" Eleanor's face contorted with rage, her lips curling into a sneer. "You ungrateful wretch! If it weren't for me, you'd have nothing. Derek was too good for you, and now you've thrown away your last chance at being part of this family." "I am not your property, Eleanor," I stated firmly, my voice unwavering. "I don't need your approval or your dysfunctional idea of family. I'm my own person, and I won't let you control me anymore." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her gaze cold and calculating. "You'll regret this, Lila. Mark my words, I'll make your life a living hell. No one turns their back on me and gets away with it." With those chilling words, she turned on her heel and stormed away, leaving me standing in the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. I had done it. I had faced my tormentor head-on and refused to back down. A sense of exhilaration coursed through me, mingled with a twinge of trepidation at Eleanor's parting threat, but I would not be deterred. For too long, I had lived in the shadow of her cruelty, allowing her to dictate the terms of my life. No more. This was my moment of defiance, and I would savor every second of it. As the adrenaline subsided, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride welling up within me. I had stood my ground, defended my autonomy, and emerged victorious. At least for now. Eleanor's words still echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that this was far from over. She was a woman scorned, and I knew better than anyone the depths of her vindictiveness. But I was no longer the meek, cowering woman she had once known. Derek's passing had awakened a fire within me, a burning desire to reclaim my life and my self-worth. And if Eleanor thought she could extinguish that flame, she was sorely mistaken. With a newfound sense of determination, I closed the door on the past and all its demons. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to fight, not just for myself, but for the future I deserved. In the weeks that followed, an uneasy truce settled over my fractured relationship with Eleanor. She had retreated into sullen silence, no doubt stewing in her bitterness and plotting her next move. I, however, refused to let her threats diminish my newfound sense of freedom. That fragile peace was shattered one Sunday afternoon when Derek's sister Claire invited me to a family gathering at her house. Despite my initial hesitation, I decided to attend, determined not to let Eleanor's toxicity dictate my life any longer. The moment I stepped through the door, I could feel Eleanor's icy glare boring into me from across the room. Her eyes narrowed as I made my way towards Claire, exchanging warm hugs and greetings with the other guests. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Eleanor sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The ungrateful daughter-in-law who turned her back on her family." A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned towards us, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. "I am not ungrateful, Eleanor," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "I simply refuse to be manipulated and controlled by you any longer." Eleanor let out a derisive cackle, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Manipulated? Is that what you call filial duty? You owe me everything, you selfish girl. If it weren't for my sacrifices, you'd have nothing." "That's enough, Mother," Claire interjected, her brow furrowed with concern. "Lila has been through enough without you adding to her pain." But Eleanor was relentless, her barbs striking with precision. "Pain? She knows nothing of true pain, not like the anguish I've endured watching my son's legacy wither on the vine thanks to her failures." I could feel the weight of her words like a physical blow, stirring up old insecurities and wounds I thought had healed. But this time, something was different. A fire burned within me, fueled by a newfound sense of self-worth and determination. "You're wrong, Eleanor," I stated firmly, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. "I may not have been able to give Derek children, but that doesn't make me a failure. My love for him was pure and unconditional, something you've never understood." Eleanor's face contorted with rage, but before she could respond, I pressed on, emboldened by the support of the onlookers. "You've had a twisted hold on this family for far too long, using guilt and manipulation to get your way. But I refuse to be a part of your dysfunction any longer. I am my own person, with my own dreams and ambitions, and I won't let you or anyone else diminish that." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Eleanor's mask of superiority began to crack. Her eyes darted from face to face, desperately seeking allies, but finding only expressions of shock and, in some cases, admiration. In that moment, I knew I had won a decisive victory, not just for myself, but for all those who had suffered under Eleanor's tyranny. The veil had been lifted, exposing her true nature for all to see, and there was no turning back. As Eleanor stormed out of the room, her face flushed with humiliation, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The shackles of her control had been broken, and I was free to embrace the future on my own terms, without the specter of her cruelty looming over me. It was a pivotal moment, a turning point in my journey towards self-discovery and empowerment. And as I looked around at the faces of my newfound allies, I knew that the battle had only just begun. The aftermath of the family gathering was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of triumph, having finally stood up to Eleanor and exposed her manipulative ways. But on the other, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. As if on cue, my phone rang the following day, and I braced myself for another verbal assault from Eleanor. To my surprise, it was Claire's voice on the other end. "Lila, we need to talk," she said, her tone laced with urgency. "Can you meet me for coffee?" An hour later, we were seated at a secluded corner of a cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting between us. "I wanted to apologize for Mother's behavior," Claire began, her eyes clouded with shame. "What she said to you was inexcusable, and I'm sorry you had to endure that." I offered a small smile, touched by her sincerity. "It's not your fault, Claire. Eleanor has always been—" I trailed off, searching for the right words. "A vindictive, manipulative tyrant?" Claire finished for me, a rueful chuckle escaping her lips. "Believe me, I know better than anyone." My brow furrowed as I studied her expression, sensing a deeper story lurking beneath the surface. "What do you mean?" Claire took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the handle of her mug. Growing up, Mother was relentless in her pursuit of perfection. Nothing we did was ever good enough, and she made sure to remind us of our flaws at every turn. A pang of recognition tugged at my heart as I listened to her words, memories of my own experiences with Eleanor's cruelty flooding back. Simon and I learned early on that the only way to survive was to either conform to her impossible standards or risk being cast aside, Claire continued, her voice tinged with bitterness. I chose the former, sacrificing my dreams to become the perfect daughter she demanded. "And Simon?" I prompted, sensing there was more to the story. Claire's expression darkened, her eyes clouding over with a mix of sadness and anger. "He refused to bow to her will, And for that, Mother made his life a living hell. She belittled him, criticized his every move, and even tried to turn Derek against him. My heart clenched at the thought of Eleanor's cruelty extending beyond just me, her venom poisoning the lives of her own children. "That's why I wanted to talk to you," Claire said, her gaze locking with mine. "You're not alone in this fight, Lila. Simon and I were with you every step of the way." A wave of relief washed over me, and I realized that in my quest for independence, I had gained something even more valuable: allies who understood the depths of Eleanor's toxicity. "Thank you, Claire," I said, reaching across the table to give her hand a gentle squeeze. "With you and Simon by my side, I feel like I can take on anything Eleanor throws at me." Claire's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "That's the spirit. Mother may think she's invincible, but she's about to learn that she's messed with the wrong family." As we parted ways, a newfound sense of determination coursed through my veins. Eleanor had drawn the battle lines, but she had unwittingly assembled an army against her. An army united by a common goal: to break free from her tyranny once and for all. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. With Claire and Simon by my side, I was part of something larger than myself, a movement fueled by the desire for justice and the pursuit of freedom from Eleanor's toxic grasp. And as I stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope ignite within me. The tide was turning, and Eleanor's reign of terror was about to meet its match. In the weeks following my alliance with Claire and Simon, an eerie silence descended upon my ongoing battle with Eleanor. It was as if she had retreated, licking her wounds and biding her time before launching her next attack. Little did I know, the calm was merely the eye of the storm, and Eleanor was busy weaving a web of deceit that threatened to unravel everything I had worked so hard to build. The first inklings of her scheme came in the form of whispers and sideways glances from acquaintances I encountered around town. At first, I brushed them off as mere curiosity, but as the murmurs grew louder, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something sinister was afoot. It all came to a head one afternoon when I stopped by the local cafe for my usual coffee break. As I waited in line, I overheard a conversation between two women seated at a nearby table, their voices hushed but audible enough for me to catch snippets of their exchange. "Such a shame about Lila abandoning her mother-in-law like that. And after everything Eleanor has done for her, too. Selfish and ungrateful, if you ask me." My heart pounded in my chest as I pieced together the fragments, realizing with growing horror that Eleanor had been spreading lies about me, painting me as the villain in our twisted narrative. Anger and disbelief coursed through my veins, but before I could confront the gossiping women, a familiar voice cut through the din. "Don't believe everything you hear," Claire said, her expression stern as she approached the table. "My mother is a master manipulator, and she's twisting the truth to suit her agenda." The women fell silent, their faces flushed with embarrassment at being caught in their indiscretion. Without another word, Claire beckoned me to follow her, and we swiftly exited the cafe. "Eleanor is up to her old tricks again," she fumed as we stepped onto the sidewalk. "Trying to turn the community against you by spreading vicious rumors." My mind raced, struggling to comprehend the depths of Eleanor's deception. But why? What does she hope to gain by turning people against me? Claire's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing with resolve. Isolation, alienation. She wants to break you down until you have no choice but to succumb to her demands. A chill ran down my spine as the realization sank in. Eleanor was waging a psychological war, using the very community I had called home as her weapon. "We can't let her get away with this," I said, my voice tinged with determination. "We need to expose her lies and show everyone the truth." Claire nodded, a glint of resolve in her eyes. "And we will. Simon and I have been gathering evidence, testimonies from others who have fallen victim to Mother's manipulation over the years. It's time we fought fire with fire." As we parted ways, a sense of purpose burned within me, fueling my resolve to take the fight to Eleanor. She had underestimated my strength, my resilience, and now she would face the consequences of her actions. Returning home, I immediately set to work, compiling every shred of evidence I had. from the hurtful words she had hurled at me over the years to the countless instances of emotional abuse. I pored over the documentation, meticulously organizing it into a damning case against Eleanor's tyranny. With each piece of evidence I uncovered, my determination grew stronger, solidifying my conviction that Eleanor's reign of terror must end, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, a newfound sense of clarity washed over me. The battle lines had been drawn, and it was time to strike back. Not just for myself, but for every life Eleanor had sought to control and diminish. The time for retribution was nigh, and I would be the one to deliver the final blow, shattering Eleanor's carefully constructed facade and exposing her true manipulative nature to the world. The days leading up to the community event were a flurry of preparation and strategizing. Claire, Simon, and I pored over every last detail, ensuring that our plan to expose Eleanor's manipulation was airtight. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Simon asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Once we pull the trigger, there's no going back." I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "I'm sure. Eleanor has tormented us for far too long. It's time she faced the consequences of her actions." Claire placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We've got your back, Lila. No matter what happens, we're in this together." Finally, the day of reckoning arrived, and the tension was palpable as we made our way to the community center. Eleanor was already there, holding court with her usual air of superiority, oblivious to the storm that was about to be unleashed. As the event commenced, I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on me, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the chance to expose Eleanor's true nature and reclaim my dignity once and for all. When my turn at the podium came, I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. As I stepped up to the microphone, Eleanor's eyes narrowed, sensing that something was amiss. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "I'm sure many of you have heard the rumors circulating about me and my supposed mistreatment of Eleanor Turner." A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads nodding in acknowledgement of the whispers that had been spreading like wildfire. "Well, I'm here to set the record straight," I continued, my gaze locking onto Eleanor's, daring her to challenge me. "The truth is, it's not me who has been the manipulator and the abuser. It's Eleanor herself." Eleanor's face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing with fury as she realized what was unfolding. "How dare you?" she spat, rising from her seat. "You ungrateful, lying." But I didn't let her finish, pressing on with my damning expose. For years, Eleanor has subjected me to emotional and psychological torment, belittling me and making me feel worthless. And I'm not the only one. With a nod to Claire and Simon, they stepped forward, each holding a stack of documents and testimonies from others who had fallen victim to Eleanor's cruelty. "These are the accounts of people whose lives Eleanor has sought to control and manipulate, all in the name of her twisted sense of family duty," I declared, my voice reverberating through the stunned silence. One by one, the testimonies were read aloud, painting a vivid picture of Eleanor's reign of terror, a tapestry of lies, manipulation, and emotional abuse woven with startling clarity. As the final account echoed through the hall, all eyes turned to Eleanor, her once imperious demeanor shattered, replaced by a mask of humiliation and defeat. "You see," I said, addressing the stunned crowd, "Eleanor has been the true villain all along, using her position of power to subjugate and control those around her. But no more. Today, her lies and deceit have been exposed for all to see." A smattering of applause broke out, growing louder as more and more people joined in, their eyes filled with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. Eleanor, meanwhile, sat frozen, her lips trembling with a combination of rage and disbelief. In a single, climactic moment, her carefully cultivated facade had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth that she had so desperately tried to conceal. As the applause died down, I turned to face her one last time, my voice steady and resolute. "Your reign of terror is over, Eleanor. You have no power over me or anyone else anymore." With those words, I stepped down from the podium, my head held high, basking in the sweet taste of victory. The shackles of Eleanor's manipulation had been broken, and I was finally free to embrace the future on my own terms, unburdened by the weight of her toxicity. As I made my way through the crowd, surrounded by a chorus of congratulations and newfound respect, I couldn't help but feel a sense of profound relief and vindication. The battle had been long and arduous, but in the end, justice had prevailed, and the truth had set me free. Eleanor's reign of terror was over, and a new chapter in my life was about to begin, one filled with the promise of healing, growth, and the sweet taste of hard-won independence. In the weeks following my public exposure of Eleanor's manipulation, a profound shift took place within me. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a burden I had carried for far too long finally cast aside. The community's reaction had been overwhelmingly supportive, with many expressing admiration for my courage in standing up to Eleanor's tyranny. Some even shared their own stories of her cruelty, reinforcing the realization that I had not been alone in my suffering. Eleanor, however, had retreated into a self-imposed exile, her once formidable presence reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. Whispers circulated that she had become a recluse, too ashamed to face the world after her lies and deceit had been laid bare. For a fleeting moment, I felt a twinge of pity for the woman who had once wielded such power over me. But that fleeting sentiment was quickly extinguished by the memory of her cruel words and actions, a stark reminder of the emotional toll she had inflicted upon me and countless others. As the dust settled, I found myself at a crossroads, uncertain of what path to take next. The shackles of Eleanor's control had been broken, but the scars of her abuse still lingered, leaving me questioning my own sense of self-worth and purpose. It was during this period of introspection that an unexpected ally emerged, Derek's brother, Simon. He had been a steadfast supporter throughout my battle with Eleanor, and now he became a source of guidance and support as I navigated the uncharted waters of my newfound freedom. "You know, Lila," he said one afternoon as we shared a cup of coffee, "you've been through hell and back, but you came out on the other side stronger than ever." I offered a wry smile, my fingers tracing the rim of my mug. "Sometimes I'm not so sure. Eleanor's words, her constant belittling, it leaves scars, Simon." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I know. Believe me, I've been there. But you can't let her win, not anymore. You've taken back control of your life, and now it's up to you to decide what comes next." His words struck a chord within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering in the aftermath of my confrontation with Eleanor. He was right. I had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to let her toxic legacy continue to haunt me. From that moment on, I made a conscious effort to reclaim my sense of self, to rediscover the woman I had been before Eleanor's manipulation had taken root. I poured myself into my work, finding solace in the creative outlets that had once brought me joy. Slowly but surely, the shadows of Eleanor's cruelty began to recede, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and self-assurance. As the months passed, I found myself surrounded by a network of supportive friends and allies, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Claire and Simon remained steadfast pillars of strength, their unwavering loyalty a constant reminder that I was no longer alone in my journey. And though Derek's absence still weighed heavily on my heart, I found solace in the knowledge that he would have been proud of the woman I had become, a woman who had stared down her demons and emerged victorious, her spirit unbroken and her determination unwavering. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment one warm summer evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and arduous path that had led me to this moment. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I embraced that uncertainty with open arms, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, I possessed the strength and resilience to overcome them. Eleanor's reign of terror was a distant memory, a mere footnote in the story of my life, a story that was just beginning to unfold, filled with the promise of growth, healing, and the sweet taste of hard-won independence. As the night sky blanketed the city, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a peace born of the knowledge that I had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my sense of self. The battles of the past had been fought and won, and now the future stretched out before me, ripe with endless possibilities. With a deep breath, I turned and made my way back inside, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life, a chapter written on my own terms, free from the shackles of Eleanor's toxicity and filled with the promise of a brighter tomorrow.
I was prepared for yet another lengthy shift when I entered the veterinary hospital that day. I considered the location to be a second home, a sanctuary where my love of animals could flourish and my humble upbringing was forgotten. I had no idea that my entire world was going to turn upside down. He was there talking to one of our experienced nurses, Janet, while resting against the front counter. I was instantly drawn in by his easy, sincere laughing that filled the room. When he grinned, I couldn't help but notice how warm his eyes were. "Can I help you?" I walked up to them with a mixture of professional courtesy and curiosity and inquired, "Oh, I just wanted to say thank you to Janet for looking after Whiskers last week." He looked at me and said, "You guys do amazing work." There was an immediate spark, an unsaid bond that I sensed from the bottom of my heart. He continued, "I'm Jaren," and held out his hand, which I shook, experiencing a shock of energy. "I'm Carol," I said, sounding more composed than I actually was. "I'm happy to see that Whiskers is improving. Making sure they receive the care they require is our responsibility." Jaren grinned broadly as he nodded. "Your enthusiasm for your work is evident to me. It's motivating. I'm here to volunteer, actually. I want to lend a hand however I can." I was caught off guard by his disclosure. Volunteers were plenty, but Jaren had a genuineness about him that was impossible to replicate. His straightforward demeanor was refreshing, particularly when he revealed that he was from a wealthy family. He casually brought up the fact, as though it were the least fascinating aspect about him. We worked side by side for the remainder of the afternoon, Jaren getting into the work with a charming, if not comical, fervor. He took on any task, no matter how filthy, from feeding the animals to cleaning their cages. Things between Jaren and myself began to move at a rate that neither of us had anticipated, but that we both secretly hoped for after our initial encounter at the veterinary hospital. Our first bond over the animals soon developed into something more, something concrete and genuine. Our first date was straightforward. I had never noticed the small, quaint cafe that Jaren took me to, even though I had passed it 1,000 times. The location was authentic and unassuming, reflecting who we were. We learned about the various ways our lives intersected over cups of coffee that became cold due to our intense chat. We were quite the couple, weren't we, from our shared appreciation of vintage films to our remarkable ability to recite passages from obscure novels. Jaren laughed and quoted a passage from one of my favorite novels, which I had mentioned in casually. His eyes were glistening with laughter. His recollection and effort astonished and delighted me, and I laughed. "Yeah, a regular Bonnie and Clyde," I replied snappily. However, our common interests and the easy laughs we shared brought us together rather than crime. Our relationship became stronger with each passing date. Simple activities like going for a stroll in the park, visiting a nearby animal shelter, or simply spending time together in solitude while feeling at ease with one another brought us happiness. I saw a glimpse of the real Jaren in these occasions. The individual responsible for the money and the associated expectations. His kindness, compassion, and sincere desire to change the world were traits that aligned with my own goals and ideals. I couldn't help but feel thankful for that fortuitous meeting at the veterinarian clinic, as those early dates grew into weeks, and then months. I approached the milestone of meeting Jaren's parents with a mixture of joy and anxiety. As we drove up to his family's home, the butterflies in my stomach grew more numerous than Jaren's assurances. It was magnificent, a great cry from the modest settings I was used to, and a clear reminder of how different our worlds were. As we approached the entrance, Jaren squeezed my hand. His grin was reassuring, but couldn't totally calm me down. He said, They're going to love you," as his parents appeared through the open door. His father, Mr. Eldridge, was the first to greet us, his demeanor warm and welcoming. "Jaron, my boy, and you must be Carol. We've heard so much about you," he said, extending a hand that enveloped mine in a firm, friendly shake. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Eldridge. It's a pleasure to meet you," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Then came Martha, Mrs. Eldridge, the woman who would soon become my infamous mother-in-law. Her appearance was impeccable, but her eyes scrutinized me in a way that made me feel like I was back in high school, desperately trying to fit in with the cool crowd. "So, Carol, Jaron tells us you worked at a veterinary clinic." "That must be interesting," she began, her tone implying that interesting was a euphemism for less than impressive. "Yes, Mrs. Eldridge. It's very fulfilling work." "I've always loved animals," I answered, trying to keep my voice, even despite the clear judgment in hers. "And your family," Jaron mentioned, "they're from the countryside. Do you visit often?" "I imagine it's quite different from the city life," she continued, each question laced with an underlying critique of my background. "My parents are wonderful people. We're very close, and yes, it's a different pace of life, but it's where I call home," I said, my pride in my roots firm despite her not-so-subtle digs. Dinner was an exercise in maintaining composure. Mrs. Eldridge's comments ranged from backhanded compliments about my quaint upbringing to outright interrogations about whether I had ever traveled abroad or dined in fine restaurants. Each question felt like a test I hadn't studied for, her words designed to highlight our differences rather than find common ground. Jaron, bless him, tried to steer the conversation to safer waters, interjecting with stories of our time together that had everyone laughing. Everyone except his mother, who seemed determined to find fault in anything related to me. It was when she asked, "Carol, dear, have you decided on a wedding dress yet? Or are you planning to make do with something homemade?" that I realized this wasn't just about getting to know me. It was about her asserting a perceived superiority, her way of reminding me that I didn't belong. I smiled, a genuine one born of the confidence Jaron's love gave me. "Mrs. Eldridge, I believe a wedding dress should reflect the love and commitment of the couple, not the price tag. Jaron and I are focused on what comes after the wedding, building a life together based on respect, love, and understanding." The silence that followed was palpable. Even Mrs. Eldridge seemed momentarily at a loss, her fork paused midair. Mr. Eldridge, however, nodded in approval, a twinkle in his eye as he looked at me. "Well said, Carol. Well said indeed." The ride home was quiet, but Jaron broke the silence with an apology that was heartfelt yet unnecessary. "I'm sorry about my mom. She can be difficult." I squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of his support. "It's okay, Jaron. Your love is all the validation I need. Together, we'll get through anything." As the wedding preparations unfolded, Martha made it her mission to underline our differences at every turn. Her intrusion wasn't just unwelcome, it was downright aggressive. She had a comment for everything, from the color scheme of the hall to the floral arrangements, and even the style of our invitation cards. One evening, as Jaron and I were finalizing the guest list, Mrs. Eldridge dropped by unannounced. Her eyes scanned our choices with evident disapproval. "You're not seriously considering the shade of green for the decor, are you?" "It's so provincial," she remarked, her nose wrinkled as if she'd smelled something foul. I tried to keep my cool, but her next comment about our guest list set me off. "And these friends of yours, they're hardly the sort one expects at a wedding of our stature. It might be best to leave them off the list, don't you think?" I felt a flash of anger, but managed to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Eldridge, Jaron and I have decided on the guest list together. Everyone we care about will be there, regardless of their status." Her lips pursed into a thin line, clearly not used to being contradicted. The tension only escalated when she turned her attention to my wedding dress, which I'd chosen for its simplicity and elegance. That dress, she sniffed, it's charming, if you're attending a country fair, perhaps. But for a wedding in our family, it's hardly appropriate. I bit back a retort, my hand clenched at my sides. Jaron, sensing the brewing storm, tried to intervene, but his mother was on a roll. "And where are you planning to honeymoon?" "A quaint little barn in the countryside?" she asked, her voice dripping with malice. That was the last straw. "Our honeymoon plans are our business," I shot back, the hurt clear in my voice. "Just like every other decision about this wedding. It's about what makes us happy, not about living up to some outdated standards." Mrs. Eldridge's eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, Jaron stepped in. "Mom, that's enough. This is our wedding, Carol's and mine. We're making the decisions that are right for us. If you can't support that, maybe you should reconsider your involvement in the planning." The room went silent. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mrs. Eldred huffed, muttered something under her breath about speaking later, and stormed out. After she left, the air felt lighter, as if her departure had lifted a weight from the room. Jaron wrapped his arms around me, his apology whispered in my ear. "I'm sorry, Carol. I don't know what's gotten into her." "It's not your fault," I sighed, leaning into his embrace. "But I'm glad you said something. This is our wedding, our day. It should be about us, not about pleasing everyone else." The wedding day, supposed to be the happiest of my life, started off just like I'd always dreamed. The church ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and promise. I stood there in my simple yet elegant dress, feeling truly beautiful and cherished, hand in hand with Jaron, my soon-to-be husband. But amidst the joy, a nagging feeling tugged at me. Glancing over, I caught my mother-in-law's expectant look, her smirk barely hidden. It was clear she was plotting something, but I pushed the thought aside, hoping for the best. The ceremony concluded without a hitch, and as we headed to the reception, I tried to hold on to the happiness of the moment. However, as soon as we arrived, I saw her again, my mother-in-law moving toward the microphone with purpose. My heart sank. With all eyes on her, she began, her voice dripping with faint sweetness. "Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about our newest family member." Her gaze locked with mine, and I felt a chill. Coming from such humble beginnings, it's truly remarkable how resourceful Carol has been. From the village to here, embracing our family with open arms, like a true freeloader. And dare I say, a beggar at our doorstep. The room fell silent, the guests exchanging uncomfortable glances. Even those from Jaron's side, the so-called high society, looked taken aback by her harsh words. I stood frozen, shock giving way to humiliation. Tears blurred my vision as I heard a few gasps and murmurs ripple through the crowd. Beside me, I could see my parents, their faces flushed with shame, hurt by the cruel words aimed at their daughter. Before I could process everything, Jaron was by my side, his voice filled with anger and apology. "I'm so sorry, Carol. I had no idea she'd stoop this low," he whispered, his arm wrapped around me in support. But before we could react further, an unexpected ally emerged, Jaron's grandmother, a respected matriarch of the family. She stood up, her presence commanding attention enough to cut through the tension. "I cannot believe what I'm hearing," she boomed, her voice cutting through the room. "This woman, who speaks so ill of simplicity and humility, seems to forget her own roots. Did you all know she herself was once nothing more than a servant in our household? And now look how she turns her nose up at those very beginnings." The room erupted in whispers. The tables turned, and my mother-in-law's face went from smug satisfaction to utter horror, her cheeks burning red as the grandmother continued to dismantle her facade of superiority. "This girl, Carol, has shown more grace and dignity than you ever have," the grandmother said, her gaze softening as she looked at me. "She is welcome in our family, not for her background, but for her heart." The reception that followed was a blur. My mother-in-law, now the subject of whispered conversations, left early, her exit barely noticed in the renewed celebration. Jaron was by my side throughout, his apologies unnecessary as his love and support spoke volumes. The room was still buzzing from the grandmother's unexpected defense of me. Guests whispered among themselves, casting sidelong glances at the now absent mother-in-law. Jaron squeezed my hand under the table, a silent promise of solidarity. "Can you believe what just happened?" Jaron asked, his voice a mix of astonishment and relief. I shook my head, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. "No. Jaron, your grandmother, she was incredible. I didn't think anyone would stand up to your mother like that, let alone in such a public way." Jaron smiled, a look of pride crossing his face. "Grandma has always been the matriarch of our family. She doesn't tolerate injustice or cruelty. I guess I forgot how formidable she can be." We were interrupted by the approach of the very woman of the hour, Jaron's grandmother. Her presence commanded respect, yet there was a warmth in her eyes as she looked at us. "Carol, dear, I hope you're feeling better after that unpleasantness," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Thank you, Mrs. Eldred. Your words meant the world to me. I was feeling pretty low, but you've turned the whole evening around," I replied, gratitude swelling in my heart. She waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense, my dear. It was long overdue. That woman needed to be reminded of her place and to learn respect. You are a part of this family now, and we protect our own." Jaron's father joined us, a sheepish look on his face. "Carol, I'm sorry for my wife's behavior. I hope you can forgive us for any hurt she's caused." I nodded, understanding the difficult position he was in. "Thank you, Mr. Eldred. Today has been a whirlwind, but your family's support has made all the difference." As the evening continued, the atmosphere in the room lightened. Guests came up to us, offering their congratulations, and in some cases, apologies for the earlier drama. It was clear that the tide had turned, not just in terms of the evening's events, but in how I was viewed by Jaron's family and their social circle. Later, as Jaron and I took to the dance floor, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory, not over his mother, but over the situation. We had faced adversity head-on and come out stronger on the other side. "Jaron," I said as we swayed to the music, "today has been a lot, but I've never been more sure about us. Your family's support, especially your grandmother's, has shown me that we can handle anything together." The atmosphere at Jaron's family home was charged as we gathered for the meeting his grandmother had called after the wedding's tumultuous events. I was anxious about facing everyone again, especially Jaron's mother. However, Jaron squeezed my hand reassuringly as we took our seats in the large living room filled with generations of Eldreds and a palpable tension. Jaron's grandmother, the undeniable matriarch, stood at the head of the room, her presence commanding attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "We're here to address a matter that concerns the dignity and unity of our family." Jaron's mother sat rigid, her eyes darting around the room, perhaps seeking an ally or preparing for a counterattack. Jaron, ever the peacemaker, spoke up first. "Grandma, I know things got out of hand at the wedding. I want to apologize on behalf of—" His grandmother raised a hand, silencing him. "Jaron, my boy, this isn't about placing blame on anyone. It's about setting things right." She then turned her gaze to me. Carol, you've shown nothing but grace and patience in the face of less than welcoming behavior. For that, you have my respect. I nodded, touched by her words. Thank you, Mrs. Eldred. I just want what's best for Jurin and to be a part of this family. The room was silent, all eyes on us. Suddenly, Jurin's mother stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I've listened enough. This girl, she gestured wildly towards me, has turned everyone against me. And you. She pointed accusingly at her mother-in-law, humiliate me in front of the whole family. Jurin's grandmother remained unfazed. I stated the truth. You forgot where you came from, and you tried to belittle Carol for her origins. That's not the Eldred way. Jurin's father finally spoke, his voice firm. Martha, your behavior has been unacceptable. It's time you reflect on your actions and their impact on our family's reputation. The room went quiet again, the weight of his words settling in. Jurin's mother sank back into her chair, her defiance fading. The grandmother continued, we are a family, and family supports and lifts each other up, not tear each other down. Carol, you are welcome here, always. As the family meeting began to wind down, the air still heavy from the discussions and revelations, Jurin's grandmother, the respected matriarch, had one more issue to address. She cleared her throat, signaling that she wasn't quite finished. Now there's another matter I need to bring to light, she started, her tone serious, hinting at the gravity of what was to come. From her purse, she pulled out a long list, the paper rustling loudly in the quiet room. It's come to my attention that Martha's spending has been, to put it mildly, extravagant and irresponsible over the past month. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes fixed on the list that seemed to unroll like a scroll. Jurin's mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her earlier defiance melting into panic. These expenses, the grandmother continued, are not only frivolous, but are bleeding our family resources dry. This cannot go on. Martha. Now pale, she looked around, perhaps hoping for an ally, but finding none. She turned to her husband, desperation in her voice. You can't let her do this to me. You know we need the money. Her husband, a man who had been quiet for most of the meeting, spoke up, his voice firm and devoid of any warmth he might have previously held for her. I agree with my mother. It's time you learn the value of hard work, Martha. I won't support your lavish lifestyle anymore. Martha's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The realization that she was truly alone in this, that her actions had consequences, seemed to dawn on her. And if your behavior continues along this path, he added, the threat clear in his tone, I will have no choice but to seek a divorce. Our family's reputation and well-being come first. The finality in his statement left no room for argument. Martha was visibly shaken, her composure completely shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she looked around the room, perhaps finally understanding the severity of her actions and their impact on those she claimed to love. After our honeymoon, a blissful escape where the world seemed to revolve around just the two of us, Jurin and I returned to a reality that had shifted in our absence. The news that greeted us was unexpected. Jurin's father had divorced Mrs. Eldred. Despite his love for his mother, Jurin stood by his father's decision. Mrs. Eldridge, now living in a modest apartment and grappling with the new necessity of finding employment, seemed a world away from the woman who had looked down on me with such disdain. It was a drastic change in fortune that I wouldn't wish on anyone, despite our past. One afternoon, not long after our return, the phone rang. Expecting it to be Jurin, who had popped out for a short errand, I answered, only to find myself on the line with Mrs. Eldridge. The conversation began awkwardly, her voice cold and tinged with the contempt that had characterized our interactions. "I suppose you're satisfied seeing me in this state." She started, her words sharp. I held the phone a little tighter, struggling to keep my voice even. "It's not about satisfaction. This was never what I wanted." The tone of her voice changed noticeably as the call went on. Gradually, the haughtiness and contempt gave way to despair. "Hear me out. I need you to speak with the grandma and your father-in-law. Perhaps they will pay attention to you. Tell them I'm sorry and that I'll be different." I was caught off guard by her request. The woman who had previously exalted herself was now pleading for help. It was a moment that exposed the vulnerability behind her formerly impregnable exterior. I inhaled deeply before answering, my choice obvious. "I apologize, but I have no place there. You need to speak with them directly about this. You, not me, should tell them this." I hung up the phone and sat for a while, feeling the pressure of the talk. I told Jaron about it when he got back, not knowing how he would respond. His countenance was attentive as he listened quietly. He paused, then spoke in a stern tone. "You made the correct decision. Even though I adore my mother, she must see the repercussions of her behavior. It's her only chance to change for the better." His backing was reassuring, and our unity grew stronger. Through the difficulties we encountered together, this journey, with all of its detours, had strengthened our relationship and brought us closer. The lessons learned from the past stayed with us as we went forward and built our life together. They served as a reminder of the tenacity of love, the value of forgiveness, and the strength that comes from sticking together despite challenging family dynamics.
Living at home with my folks till I was 25 wasn't something I planned out like some strategy. It just felt right, you know. We were tight, like really tight. Some folks get antsy to bolt the moment they hit 18, but not me. My parents' place was more than just a house. It was home in the realest sense. I didn't see much point in changing that. Then life threw a curveball. Losing them both to the pandemic felt like someone ripped the ground right out from under me. Suddenly I was staring at this gaping hole in my life, trying to figure out what comes next. They left me enough money to coast for a while, but the thought of just living off their hard work felt off. It didn't sit right with me. So I made up my mind to pull myself together. It wasn't easy, I'll tell you that. The whole idea of diving into the job market, of being truly on my own for the first time, was daunting. But the alternative, living in a bubble, pretending I didn't need to grow up, that wasn't an option anymore. Finding a job wasn't a walk in the park either. I ended up landing a gig as a manager at this trading company. The work was a whole new world for me, but I dug my heels in, determined to make it work. Got to start somewhere, I told myself over and over. I remember running into an old friend from school, Jake, while I was out grabbing lunch one day. He spotted me first. "Hey, isn't that the homebird Emily, still living in your folks' nest?" he teased, a smirk playing on his lips. His words stung more than I wanted to admit. I squared my shoulders, facing him head on. "Actually, Jake, I'm managing on my own now. Got a job and everything," I shot back, the words laced with a mix of pride and defiance. "Oh, look at you, all grown up and independent. Never thought I'd see the day," he laughed, but there was no real warmth in it. "Yeah, well, people change, things happen. You learn to stand on your own 2 feet, I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. The conversation felt like walking through a minefield, each word carefully chosen but loaded. Jake shrugged, the conversation clearly not going the way he expected. "Fair enough, good for you, Emily, really." We parted ways shortly after the encounter, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. It was a reminder of how far I'd come, sure, but also of how much further I had to go. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of the house that used to be filled with my parents' laughter, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was fear, yeah, but also a budding sense of determination. I was on a path they'd never get to see, forging a new life from the remnants of the old. The chill in the air wasn't just from the December cold, it was my first holiday season without my folks. The Christmas sale crowd was a mix of frantic and festive, a sharp contrast to my own numb wandering. That's when I bumped into him, literally. Ouch, watch it. I started more out of surprise than pain. Sorry, my fault entirely, he replied, catching a box of Christmas ornaments before it hit the ground. This crowd is wild, huh? He was about my age, with a look of earnest concern that quickly changed to a sheepish grin. I'm Alex, he said, extending a hand, not holding runaway Christmas decor. Emily, I responded, taking his hand briefly. Yeah, it's madness. Christmas shopping always turns into a contact sport. Alex laughed, and it was an easy, genuine sound. You're not wrong, I'm just trying to find something for my mom. She loves these handmade ornaments, but I'm clueless. Looking at the box he almost dropped, I picked one up. These are nice. Look, this one's got intricate designs. Bet she'd love it. We moved through the stalls together, talking about everything and nothing. Alex was easy to talk to, a breath of fresh air in the midst of holiday chaos. So Emily, what brings you here? Looking for anything in particular? He asked as we paused by a stall selling handmade scarves. Just trying to feel, I don't know, festive I guess. My parents, well, it's just me now. Holidays feel different, I confessed, surprised at my own honesty. Alex's expression softened. I get that. Holidays, they can be tough. But hey, we find new ways to make them ours, right? Yeah, right, I agreed, finding comfort in his understanding. We ended up spending the afternoon together, finding gifts and sharing stories as the sun began to set, casting long shadows between the stalls. Hey Emily, would you maybe want to grab a coffee as a thank you for helping me survive this shopping ordeal? And well, for the company? He suggested, hopeful but clearly trying to play it cool. I thought about it. My instinct was to retreat, to go back to my quiet, solitary world. But something about Alex, his easy kindness and his understanding, made me want to say yes. Sure Alex, I'd like that. Coffee sounds perfect, I replied, feeling a spark of something warm in the cold evening air as we walked toward the nearest cafe. I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would mark the beginning of something new. Not just surviving, but maybe starting to live again. A couple of months down the line, Alex decided it was high time I met his folks. I was a bundle of nerves, hoping to make a good impression. Their welcome was polite, but I could feel the chill through their smiles. We were barely through the door when the questioning started. It was like stepping into the ring, except I wasn't prepared for this kind of bout. So dear, Alex tells us she lost your parents recently. That must have been tough, his mom began, her tone soft but probing. Yeah, it was a rough patch, still is sometimes, I admitted, fidgeting with the hem of my shirt. The conversation felt too personal. Too soon. And what about work? Alex mentioned you're in trading. How's that treating you? His dad chimed in, his curiosity not quite matching the warmth supposed to accompany such questions. It's going good, keeps me on my toes, I responded, trying to keep the nerves out of my voice. Must be quite the lucrative field, eh? What kind of figures are we talking about? His mom's question hit me like a cold splash, too forward, too soon. I glanced at Alex, hoping he'd throw me a lifeline. The look on my face must have said it all because he quickly jumped in. Mom, Dad, come on, let's not grill her about money, that's not important, Alex said, his tone firm yet respectful. I could have hugged him right then. Despite his intervention, the evening carried an undercurrent of unease. After we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't measured up to their expectations. In the car, the silence was heavy until I couldn't take it anymore. Alex, do you think your parents didn't like me? The words tumbled out, laced with worry. Alex took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Hey, don't worry about it. They're just protective, you know. Give it some time. They'll see how amazing you are. Just like I do. His words were meant to comfort, and a part of me wanted to believe him, but the doubt lingered, a shadow on what should have been a straightforward step forward in our relationship. Settling into married life at my place was like a dream for the first 6 months. Me and Alice, we were in our little bubble of happiness. Sure, his mom, Mrs. Thompson, didn't exactly warm up to me. Always poking at my cooking, my cleaning, even how I dressed. But since they lived a good drive away, those jabs were few and far between. We managed. Then one evening, Alex came home looking like he'd lost his best friend. Babe, I've got to head out of town for work, 2 whole months, he said, barely meeting my eyes. My heart sank. 2 months? That's ages. What about us? I asked, my voice trembling with worry. I know. It's the last thing I want. But I don't have a choice. And there's more. My mom's in the hospital, heart problems. Hearing that about Mrs. Thompson, despite our rocky relationship, I couldn't help but feel worried. Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry. Is she okay? They're not sure yet. She might need surgery, he replied, his voice cracking a bit. Without a second thought, I said, I'll look after her while you're gone. She'll need someone, right? Alex looked at me, a mix of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. You'd do that, after everything? I nodded. Of course, she's your mom. The next day, I took a day off and headed to his parents' place. Mrs. Thompson was already home from the clinic, looking frail but stubborn as ever. Emily, what are you doing here? She asked, eyeing me like I might steal the silver. I'm here to help out. Alex is worried about you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She huffed, settling back into her chair. Well, I don't need babysitting, especially not by you. I bit back a sharper reply. I know you don't, but I'm here to help with cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. Mrs. Thompson squinted at me as if trying to figure out my angle. Fine, but I like my meals on time and my house spotless. And don't think you can dress like a slob here. I forced a smile. Understood. Those weeks turned into a trial by fire. I cooked, cleaned, and did my best to keep things running smoothly, all under Mrs. Thompson's critical eye. Every dish I made was either too salty or too bland. Every room I cleaned missed some speck of dust only she could see. One evening, as I was scrubbing the kitchen counter for what felt like the 10th time, she walked in, watching me like a hawk. You missed a spot, she said, pointing to a corner so far back it would require me to grow an extra arm to reach it without moving everything off the counter. Mrs. Thompson, I'm doing the best I can, I said, my patience wearing thin. She snorted. Clearly, your best isn't good enough. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. Alex was counting on me, and I wasn't about to let him down, no matter how much his mother pushed my buttons. Is there anything else you need before I go to bed? I asked, keeping my tone polite. Just make sure you're up early to start breakfast, and try not to burn the eggs this time, she replied. Turning on her heel and leaving me to my thoughts. Life at my in-laws became more of a boot camp than a recovery ward pretty fast. Every day, it was like waking up to a new list of demands from my mother-in-law. And every evening, I juggled my job and her endless requests that just piled up one on top of the other. "Can you fetch me the remote? It's just there on the coffee table," Mrs. Thompson would say, pointing at an object mere inches from her hand. The first few times, I didn't mind, but then it became a routine, her asking for things she clearly could get herself. Cooking dinner turned into a tactical mission, trying to remember all of her dietary whims. "I only eat organic greens, you know, and the chicken needs to be cooked just so," she'd instruct, her voice carrying that tone that said any deviation would be unacceptable. Evenings, the only time I could catch my breath, were hijacked by the blaring TV. Mr. Thompson had a thing for action movies, the louder the better. There I was, exhausted, trying to find some peace but instead getting a front row seat to explosions and car chases. "You know, Emily, ever since you married my son, my health has just gone downhill," Mrs. Thompson threw at me one evening out of nowhere. Her words stung, especially since I was bending over backward, trying to make her life easier. I tried to keep my cool, but it was getting tougher. "I'm really trying my best here, Mrs. Thompson. I don't see how my being with your son is causing your health issues," I said. Her lips pursed into a thin line, clearly displeased. "Well, if you can't see it, I'm not sure how much help you are here," she replied. I was at my wit's end, dreaming of my own bed, my own kitchen, my sanctuary. But then Alex called. "Babe, I'm so sorry, but I'm stuck here for another 2 months. The project's just not wrapping up as we expected." Hearing his voice tired and strained, I wanted to be strong, to not add to his stress. "It's okay, Alex, we'll manage somehow," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Are you sure Mom's not giving you a hard time, is she?" he asked, worry creeping into his voice. After hanging up, I realized this was my battle to fight, at least for now. Mrs. Thompson and her demands, the never-ending noise, the blame, it was all on me to bear. But I couldn't help but wonder how much longer could I keep this up. The strain at home hit a peak when Mrs. Thompson had another heart scare and ended up needing surgery. It was serious enough that I called Alex in a panic, and he rushed back home. Seeing him was a relief, but it was short-lived because work pulled him away again. After the surgery, things at home didn't get any easier. Mrs. Thompson came back needing more care than before. It was like looking after a child. She wanted help with everything. Eating, dressing, you name it. And Mr. Thompson, he was no help at all. Instead of appreciating the effort, he complained, "You're always out. I end up cooking for both of us. What are we, chopped liver?" Then Mrs. Thompson started with her threats, saying she'd tell Alex I was neglecting her, hinting he should leave me. "He'll listen to his mother, you'll see," she'd hiss, as if I wasn't already stretched to my limit. My patience was wearing thin, like an old pair of jeans about to tear at the seams. Mrs. Thompson's demands grew by the day, each one more unreasonable than the last. It felt like I was living in a pressure cooker, waiting for the whistle to blow. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find Mrs. Thompson in the living room, a scowl set deep on her face. "Where have you been? I've been waiting for you to start dinner," she snapped as soon as I walked through the door. "I had to stay late at work, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sorry. I'll start on dinner right away," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite my frustration. "Make sure it's edible this time. Last night's dinner was a disaster," she retorted, turning her attention back to the TV, which was, as usual, blaring at an ear-splitting volume. I wanted to scream, to let out all the frustration and exhaustion I'd been bottling up inside. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked into the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I began to prepare dinner. 2 weeks passed like that, and my obnoxious ward should have fully recovered by now. However, Mrs. Thompson remained weak. One day, I got off work early. I was tiptoeing into the house, hoping for a quiet afternoon, but what I found was anything but. There was my mother-in-law, lively as can be, chattering away on the phone like she was at some high tea party. Yeah, I've got her wrapped around my finger. Just a little act here and there, and she jumps, does everything for me, even the little things. I can do it myself, she boasted to her friend, her laughter echoing off the walls. I stood there, frozen, key still in hand. The realization hit me like a truck. All this time, her needing help, her pain. A good chunk of it was just an act, a manipulative play to have me wait on her hand and foot. The anger bubbled up inside me, hot and fierce. I stepped into the room unable to hold back. Really now, is that how it is? Putting on a show so I do more for you? I confronted her, my voice hard, the words tumbling out. She turned, the phone still clutched to her ear, her face a mix of shock and guilt. For a moment, she looked like she was caught in the headlights. Then, quick as a flash, her demeanor changed. "Oh, you're home, look at the time," she said into the phone, brushing off our confrontation, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. This was a game, Cher. I realized then, that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. Not because I wasn't doing it right, but because the goalposts were always moving. I finally said, the disappointment heavy in my voice. "I've been breaking my back for you, and this is how you repay me, by lying, by manipulating." Her response was cold, calculated. "I'm just making sure you're doing your part, after all. You married into this family. It's your duty." I didn't want to fight, but I couldn't let this go. "I've had it, Mrs. Thompson. I'm leaving this house," I said, my resolve hardening. Before I knew it, she was on her feet, fury in her steps as she snatched my phone from the kitchen counter. She stormed outside, and I followed, only to watch in disbelief as she threw it under the car, smashing it. "Let's see you call for help now," she sneered, her actions betraying her desperation. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, not just for the phone, but for the sheer breakdown of respect. I started gathering my things, determined to leave, but she wasn't done. She followed, throwing my clothes and personal items out after me, shouting insults that stung deeper than the cold air. "You're nothing, you don't deserve to be part of this family." I was outside, picking up my things and trying to hold back tears when Alex arrived. The sight of his car was both a relief and a harbinger of the confrontation to come. "What's going on here?" Alex demanded, his eyes darting between his mother standing at the doorway and me, a mess on the driveway. "She's crazy, Alex. She's been lying about how sick she is, and now this." I gestured to the scattered belongings and my destroyed phone. His gaze shifted to his mother, searching for a denial that didn't come. "Mom, is this true?" Mrs. Thompson's facade crumbled, but her defiance didn't. "She was never good enough for you, never good enough for our family." Walking into his parents' house, Alex was a storm dressed in human skin. His face was set, his jaw tight, ready to confront the hurricane his parents had brewed. "I can't believe what I've been hearing and seeing. How could you?" Alex started, his voice heavy with disappointment and anger. Mrs. Thompson shot back. "Oh, now you're going to believe her over your own mother. She's turned you against us, filled your head with lies." "That's enough, Mom." Alex's voice cut through her accusations like a knife. "I've seen the videos, I've heard the recordings. I've heard enough of your words about her. There's no denying what you've done." The color drained from Mrs. Thompson's face as realization sank in. Her bravado faltered, her usual sharp tongue suddenly heavy in her mouth. "And you?" Alex turned to his father. "You just stood by, You let this happen. Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably, the guilt evident in his avoidance to meet his son's gaze. Alex continued, his disappointment unwavering. Did you know that she sold her parents' house to pay for your wife's operation, because the insurance wouldn't cover it all? We were planning to build a new house. A place where we could all live together, but not anymore. The room went silent. The weight of Alex's words pressing down on everyone. Mrs. Thompson, tears streaming down her face, reached out. Please. I didn't know. I can change. We can forget all this happened. But Alex was resolute. It's too late for that. You've shown us who you really are. We're done here. I'm done. Mr. Thompson, realizing the magnitude of their loss, turned to his wife with a look of betrayal. You foolish woman, you've ruined everything. As Alex and I walked out to the car, the finality of the situation settled in. We were leaving behind more than just a house. We were severing ties with a part of our lives that had turned toxic. Sitting in the car, about to start a new chapter, Alex took my hand. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but we're going to start fresh, just the two of us. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. Together, I affirmed, squeezing his hand back. We drove off, leaving behind the chaos, ready to build a new life on our terms, grounded in truth and respect, away from the shadows of manipulation and deceit. A month flew by, and finally, our new house was ready. A real beauty, if I do say so myself. Alex and I put our hearts into making it a home, picking out every piece with care, making sure it all felt like us. We hadn't spoken to his folks since that day, heard through the grapevine that his dad up and left, found someone new, leaving Mrs. Thompson to fend for herself in some small apartment. She tried reaching out, wanted to patch things up, but for us, that ship had sailed. Some wounds are too deep for sorry to heal. One evening, as we settled into our new living room surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, Alex looked over at me with a smile that always made my heart skip. So babe, how do you feel about starting a family here? He asked, his voice casual but eyes filled with hope. I paused, the question hanging in the air like a promise. A baby here with you, that sounds like the dream. Alex reached for my hand, his touch grounding. I think we're ready to make new memories, good ones, in this place we built together. I nodded, the future suddenly blooming before us, filled with possibilities. It'll be amazing, our own little family, yeah? Alex agreed, a softness in his voice. Our own fresh start, away from all the drama, just us and a new beginning. As we sat there planning for a future filled with laughter and love, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace despite the rocky road that led us here. We were building something beautiful on our own terms.
Just look at that, I exclaimed, staring at the electricity bill in disbelief. $327.38, nearly double what we usually pay. Outrageous. I'd always prided myself on budgeting carefully, tracking every expense down to the last penny. My passion was collecting limited edition desserts, and I indulged whenever I could, so for the bill to suddenly skyrocket made no sense. That can't be right, Neil replied, peering over my shoulder with a frown. My supportive husband was always on my side. We haven't changed any habits recently. Well, something caused this. I grabbed my laptop to scrutinize the household usage data. No obvious spikes. Perplexed, I gazed out the window and stopped short. There, peeking out from beneath the decorative bushes separating our house from Neil's parents' new home next door, was a wire, thin and black, snaking towards their shed. Surely just a cable line? But we had underground connections. A horrible suspicion crossed my mind. No, it wasn't possible. Was it? Just last month, Neil's parents Vera and Hank had moved into the newly constructed house on the lot beside ours. Neil and I had welcomed them warmly despite Vera's tendency to overstep with unsolicited parenting advice. I'd written it off as her quirky way of showing warmth. But now, Neil, look, I gestured out the window. As he spotted the wire, his eyebrows shot up. Without a word, we stepped outside, circling the bushes to trace the wire's path. It ran directly from our external outlet to Vera and Hank's shed. Our mouths fell open as we exchanged stunned looks. "No way," Neil uttered in disbelief. "They can't be." Anger and hurt welled up inside me. They'd seemed so friendly, so supportive. Had it all been an act? Just then, the back door of their house opened. Vera breezed out carrying gardening shears, calling over her shoulder, "Be back in a minute." Spotting us, she changed course, bearing down with her usual overbright smile, the one I now realized never reached her eyes. "Well, hi there, neighbors," she trilled. "Taking in this beautiful sunny day?" I crossed my arms. No more playing nice while she played us for fools. "We were just investigating something strange," I said bluntly, stepping aside so she could see the wire. "Would you happen to know anything about this?" Vera's gaze bounced from me to the wire and back again. For a brief moment, her smile faltered, but then she waved a hand and laughed. "Oh, that old thing. The builders must have left it behind." Even to me, the excuse sounded feeble. She trailed off under my stern gaze. Neil stepped forward, fists clenching. "Have you been stealing our electricity, using this wire to tap into our supply?" His voice shook with anger and betrayal. Vera reeled back. "What? How dare you?" She glared venomously. "I was just trying to cut costs. Our retirement budget is stretched thin. Surely you understand." At that, the floodgates opened. I lost my composure, shouting at her audacity. Neil joined me, demanding answers about the ethics of stealing from family. She alternated between righteous indignation and half-hearted apologies. The confrontation left me reeling and even more hurt than before. That evening, after Vera had retreated in a huff, Neil held me as I cried bitter tears over the shattered remains of what I'd thought was a supportive, loving family relationship. How could they betray us like this, and what else might they be hiding? I couldn't even bear to tally up how much they could have stolen over the past month. Hundreds of dollars we'd worked hard for, callously snatched away without a thought for how it would impact us. Gazing at our electricity bill later that night, I set my jaw. The Vera and Hank I thought I knew would never do something so underhanded, which meant I'd never actually known them at all. The realization stung, but it sparked a steely determination within me. No more playing nice while they took advantage and sabotaged our carefully balanced budget. If this was their opening salvo, then the battle lines had just been drawn. I would get to the bottom of this and make them pay. I awoke the next morning still simmering from yesterday's confrontation. As I gulped my morning coffee, I kept replaying Vera's audacious lies and excuses. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. A knock at the front door made me jump. Speak of the devil. I peered out to see Vera standing there clutching a plate of cookies, an overly bright smile pasted on. Just seeing her made my blood boil even hotter. I swung open the door. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. Vera blinked, clearly taken aback by my lack of pleasantries. Good. Her smile dimmed a fraction. "Oh, Lena, about yesterday." She extended the plate. I baked these by way of apology. I stared at the offering in disgust. Did she really think cookies would make everything better? When I made no move to take them, she pressed on earnestly. "It was all just a silly misunderstanding. I never meant any harm, truly." Misunderstanding, my fists clenched by my sides. This woman's audacity knew no bounds. "You mean when you deliberately tapped into our electricity supply to avoid paying your fair share?" I bit out. Vera frowned, dropping the act. "Oh, don't be so self-righteous. Our budget is extremely tight. We're just cutting costs where we can." "By stealing from us? From your own son? How could you? We trusted you." My raised voice brought Neil from the other room. I felt him come stand supportively beside me. Vera flushed. "Now see here, you two are blowing this out of proportion. Can't we talk civilly about this over some cookies?" She offered the plate again with a conciliatory smile, but I'd had enough. Taking the plate from her, I upended it onto the doormat. Cookies scattered everywhere as Vera gasped. "There! Take back your lies and excuses." I glared venomously. We will not be placated so easily. As I slammed the door in her astonished face, I felt a small spark of vicious satisfaction. There, let her see I wasn't messing around. Over the next few days, Vera's intrusions multiplied, stoking my simmering resentment. She popped by nearly every day with unwanted gifts and advice about everything from our spending habits to refrigerator organization. Each visit grated on me more. The final straw came when I spotted her letting herself in our back gate one morning. Marching outside, I confronted her sneaking around near our fuse box. She claimed she was just checking the wiring, but I knew she was scoping out ways to restore her illegal supply. Enraged, I changed the locks and gate code. When Neil suggested leaving a key with his parents just in case of emergency, I shot that down fast. Give them an inch, they'd take 10 miles. Clearly, they refused to respect boundaries. Well, if politeness wouldn't get through, then it was time to play hardball. Over dinner with Neil that night, I revealed my plan. We need evidence before going to the electric company or police. I'm going to set up a surveillance camera covering that fuse box. That should capture any further attempts. Neil frowned nervously. Isn't that a bit aggressive? They're still my parents. I fixed him with an adamant stare. They committed theft without batting an eye. I warned you they'd take advantage of any wiggle room we give them. It's time to take a stand. Neil's shoulders slumped. You're right. I just wish it hadn't come to this. I knew he was still clinging to hope of reconciling with them. But sentimentality would get us nowhere against such conniving adversaries. The very next morning, the camera captured Vera skulking by our fuse box, clearly probing for a way to reconnect. Gotcha! I added the video to the growing evidence file. When she caught me installing a motion-activated floodlight days later, Vera went pale. I maintained steely eye contact until she hurried away without a word. Good. Let her sweat a little. She was quickly learning her tricks wouldn't work on me. Soon we'd have enough documentation to bring down the full consequences on her deceitful head. She'd rue the day she ever thought she could walk all over me without retaliation. By the time I was through, karma would bite back hard for her lies and manipulation. This was only the opening salvo. The real fireworks were still to come. Over the next week, I became obsessed with monitoring Vera's activity and tracking our electricity usage. I knew something didn't add up there and was determined to get to the bottom of things. Sure enough, one morning the motion detector notifications showed Vera skulking around our yard in the early hours. The floodlight switched on, illuminating her heading towards the back gate with wire cutters in hand. Smirking, I swung open the back door. Forget the locks, Vera? Or were you hoping to override my security system? She jolted, hiding the cutters behind her back. Lena, I was just, checking the wiring connections back here. I stepped forward, glaring daggers. Save it. I've got you on camera trying to break in and poach our supply again. Vera straightened defiantly. You can't prove anything. I'm well within my rights to check wiring on my property. The only thing you have a right to do is stay the hell away from our house, I shouted. Give me those. I lunged for the cutters, but she dodged me. We struggled briefly before she wrenched away, lips curled in a sneer. Have it your way, then. But this isn't over. I promise you that. She turned and stormed off. Seething, I relocked the gate and rearmed the security system. How far would that deranged woman go? Over the next few days, Vera kept her distance. But my anger simmered, erupting one evening when our latest electricity bill arrived. I tore open the envelope and scanned the total, $412.60. What? I exploded, making Neil jump. Even after locking them out, it keeps getting higher. Neil's forehead creased with worry. Are you sure the motion lights aren't causing it? I shook my head firmly. I've accounted for every variable. Something fishy is still going on here. Suddenly the doorbell rang. We exchanged wary glances before Neil opened it to reveal Hank standing there, shuffling nervously. We need to talk, he mumbled, not quite meeting our eyes. It's about the wiring issues. I crossed my arms, steeling myself. Go on, then. Hank cleared his throat. Vera wants to bury the hatchet, and we'd like a key made just in case you two are ever unavailable and an emergency repair is needed. My temper flared again. Give them access after everything? Not a chance. I jabbed a finger at Hank's chest. You mean give you free rein to keep tapping our power? Hank backed away, protesting. Neil quickly intervened before things escalated further. After Hank retreated in a huff, Neil gave me a serious look. We can't keep fighting them like this. What if we sit down civilly and try to sort this out? I bit my lip, considering. As much as I hated to admit it, maybe we did need an open conversation before things spiraled irrevocably out of control. So a few days later, Vera and Hank sat stiffly on our couch while Neil mediated. I stated my case bluntly. The unchecked electricity drainage had to stop, or we'd take legal action. Vera alternated between superficial apologies and rambling excuses, while Hank stared at the floor. Eventually, Neil negotiated a tenuous truce. We'd refrain from formal complaints if the electrical issues ceased immediately. After they left, Neil gave me a pleading look. Let's give them one last chance before escalating this further? Though it grated on me, I reluctantly agreed. One final opportunity to make things right, before my vengeance hammer fell with full righteous fury. In the following days, I still patrolled for suspicious activity, but when our next bill showed only a marginal increase, I allowed my guard to lower slightly. Maybe they were actually holding up their end for once. Either way, the surveillance would continue. I wouldn't be fooled again by their facade. Soon I'd know if this truce was genuine, or merely the quiet before their next brazen attack. I awoke one morning to find Neil already up, pacing worriedly. Wordlessly, he handed me the latest electricity bill, $492.79. I saw red. It was even higher than the first shocking amount. Despite all my precautions, I slammed the paper down. I knew it. They blatantly lied about stopping their deceitful schemes. It's time to bring down the hammer on them. Neil wrung his hands anxiously. Shouldn't we confirm it's actually them first? Oh, it's them all right, I fumed. Now we're getting the electric company involved to trace this. Whipping out my phone, I called to demand an urgent investigation. The following afternoon, I escorted the technician towards our fuse box, scanning for any sight of Vera and Hank. If they caught wind of this inspection, there'd be hell to pay. Luckily, their house appeared silent. The tech removed the box cover, examining the interior wiring with a practiced eye. As he shifted to inspect the ground wire connections, he paused. Well, that shouldn't be there. I hurried over to see him tugging on a cable that had been very deliberately wired into our supply line. My fists clenched with rage. Gotcha! I knew they couldn't resist resuming their illegal connections. Their audacity knew no bounds. The technician shook his head. You've got a tap wire spliced directly into your power. Draining it right off, too. He traced the cable behind our bushes. Looks like that house next door. I threw my hands up furiously. I knew it. Those lying snakes swore they'd stop stealing from us. Wait until I expose their thievery to the whole neighborhood. I whirled to storm next door and confront them, but Neil grabbed my shoulders gently. We have solid evidence now. Let's make a plan first before charging over there. I took a deep breath, wrestling my temper back under control. He was right. As satisfying as a verbal lashing would feel, it would likely only spawn more lies and denial. Better to retain the element of surprise for now. The technician cleared his throat awkwardly. If you'd like to file charges, I can provide documentation on the unauthorized wiring setup here. I gave a sharp nod. Yes, we absolutely want to pursue this legally. Justice would be served soon enough. That night after dinner, Neil and I strategized our next moves. In addition to pressing charges, I suggested blasting their thievery across neighborhood Facebook groups. Once everyone knows what duplicitous fraudsters they are, they'll be social outcasts. Avoiding jail is the least of what they deserve. I slammed my hand on the table for emphasis. Neil bit his lip nervously. I agree they need to face consequences, but public shaming seems extreme. I leaned forward adamantly. After all the warnings and second chances, I will flaunt their shame so widely they'll never show their faces around here again. Neil still looked hesitant about my scorched earth approach, but the die was cast. After tomorrow's confrontation, one way or another, Vera and Hank would regret the day they ever targeted me as an easy victim for their deception. The next evening, I turned off all our outdoor lights and ensured the motion detectors were disabled. Under cover of darkness, the technician arrived to sever and remove Vera and Hank's parasitic connection. Phase 1 of retaliation was complete. At sunrise, after double-checking the cables had been separated, I dialed the police dispatcher with Neil beside me. My hand tremored slightly as I reported the extensive wire fraud next door. But my voice remained steady, fueled by white-hot indignation. I wanted to witness Vera and Hank's reactions firsthand when the police showed up to investigate. But Neil convinced me to lay low to avoid prematurely tipping them off. So we watched discreetly through the window as first one, then two squad cars rolled up outside their house. As the officers knocked and presented a search warrant, I hugged myself tight, almost dizzy with vicious satisfaction. Got them. After all the lies and manipulation, their web of deception was unraveling before my eyes. Soon they'd be facing criminal charges, and once word spread about their shady exploits grifting naive neighbors, their remaining reputation would be left in tatters too. I finally exhaled, feeling the knots of tension start to loosen within me. The confrontation would come soon enough, but for now I'd scored a decisive victory against their underhanded scheming. Watching the police continue scouring Vera and Hank's home for illicit connections, I allowed myself a small smug smile. Justice was finally at hand. In the aftermath of the police visit, an uneasy quiet descended on our normally peaceful neighborhood. I kept vigilant watch out the window as whispers spread about Vera and Hank's shady wiring scam. When curious neighbors knocked to probe us for details, I remained tight-lipped. Let the authorities handle things from here. Though it took immense self-restraint not to blast Vera's misdeeds from the rooftops myself, I waited to see how the investigation unfolded. Sure enough, a few days later, Neil spotted a certified letter in their mailbox, addressed from the county clerk's office. Subpoena for evidence, no doubt. The wheels of justice were turning. My smug satisfaction only grew when I peered out the window later to see Vera emerging red-eyed and distressed from a shouting match with Hank. She must be waking up to the severity of the charges they faced with their little larceny scheme unraveling fast. As I watched her hurry tearfully back inside, I couldn't suppress a vicious smirk. Where were her snide excuses and haughty denials now that hard proof had been found? Serves her right. Maybe the threat of jail time would make her reflect on toying with decent, law-abiding folks. The sight stirred conflicting emotions in Neil, though. That night over dinner, his brow remained deeply furrowed. Do you think I should try talking to them?" he suggested tentatively. "Plead for leniency with the DA before an indictment comes down?" My hand clenched furiously around my fork. Lenient? Is that what their deceit and manipulation warranted? When they'd shown no mercy towards our hard-earned money or trust in family bonds? Taking a deep breath to rein in my outrage, I fixed Neil with a stern look. "You can't protect them from what's coming. Don't let misplaced guilt sway you from the facts." He looked away, jaw tight. I knew seeing his parents suffer pained him on some level. But the time for sympathy was long past. The next morning brought a new development, a large for sale sign staked outside Vera and Hank's house. Peering out as a startled neighbor walked by, I understood immediately. They were trying to liquidate fast and hightail it out of here before the hammer fell. Well, not if I had anything to say about it. Storming outside in my bathrobe, I waved wildly to stop the passing couple gawking at the sign. Time for some strategic gossip-mongering. "A shame about those electrical thieves leaving already, isn't it?" I commented conversationally. I would have loved to see them in handcuffs getting dragged off to prison myself. The wife's eyes boggled. Mission accomplished. That juicy tidbit would spread quickly now. Let's see anyone make offers once word got out they were flight risks awaiting criminal charges. I strode back inside with grim satisfaction, already formulating my next moves. Vera and Hank had avoided me long enough. It was time we finally talked openly. Soon Neil and I stood firmly at their front door as I rapped sharply. When Vera answered, surprise flashed across her face before she schooled her features carefully neutral. "Lena, Neil, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Her polite tone held an unmistakable note of wariness. I folded my arms severely. "You know exactly why. We're here to talk things over." Vera eyed me for a long, silent moment before reluctantly backing up in wordless invitation. As we stepped inside and sat on their couch, I inspected Vera closely. She seemed diminished somehow, worn and haggard in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. The gnawing anxiety was clear in her dull eyes and tense posture. Good, let her squirm. I had zero intentions of showing mercy. Not until she fully acknowledged her lies and made proper amends. Settling back with arms still crossed, I pinned her with an icy stare. Well then, let's chat frankly now about recent events, shall we? Her hands twisted together nervously. Yes, Vera. Face the music at last. In the days following Vera and Hank's dramatic arrest, the neighborhood gossip mill churned faster than ever before. Supportive friends stopped by, eager for updates while casting disdain on that awful thieving couple. I remained discreet with details, but made sure everyone knew they'd admitted guilt to us directly. Let Vera's illusions of sympathy for her plight be crushed. Neil busied himself advocating for leniency, against my advice. She still deserves imprisonment for the betrayal of family, I argued hotly. Neil just sighed. Harsh sentences won't undo the damage, though. Though it irked me letting Vera off lightly, Neil's pure heart wouldn't wish crushing punishment on anyone. A week later, Neil got an update call from Vera's lawyer. In exchange for testimony on other neighborhood scam incidents, she'd gotten off with probation and heavy court fees. I scowled angrily at the news. A light slap on the wrist. Where was the justice for nearly $1,000 stolen from us over numerous months? Storming outside that afternoon to retrieve the mail, I paused, seeing Hank shuffling forlornly around their for sale sign. His worn complexion and disheveled appearance testified to many sleepless, stressful nights since their crimes had come to light. Good. Let the weight of consequences torment them a while longer. Skirting widely around Hank, I went back inside, feeling sour. Neil tried reassuring me again. She's banned from our property at least, plus the public shaming. Isn't that enough? My temper flared. Hardly. That woman slithered out of any real punishment for her misdeeds. Well, we shall see. I wasn't done with Vera yet. Time for the next phase. Ensuing, she fully paid her karmic debts. Using contacts I had in the county clerk's office, I quietly pursued getting the case evidence released publicly. And I began judiciously leaking additional gossip about Vera's long history of shady dealings. Let the full spotlight expose her deceit for all to revile. Soon enough, muckraking local reporters came sniffing at my prompts. I watched with smug satisfaction as the first scathing exposés skewering shameless schemester Vera hit the presses. As if on cue, my phone pinged with a neighborhood watch alert. Vera had been spotted yelling tearfully at a reporter to leave her alone. Music to my ears. Clearly, the non-stop public harassment was taking its toll. Over dinner, I showed Neil the alert triumphantly. Now she's getting a taste of consequences beyond the courthouse. But instead of matching my fierce grin, Neil paled. This seems less like justice and more just cruelty now, he said quietly. She's clearly paid for her crimes already. I smacked my hand down furiously. How can you say that? Mere fines and hand slaps while she sobs about harassment. I won't rest until she fully understands the pain her deceit caused. Neil just gazed at me sorrowfully. Stung, I turned away. Why couldn't he see I was protecting us from further exploitation? The next morning brought a new bombshell. I spotted a local real estate item announcing Vera and Hank's house had sold for a fraction of its value after sitting unpurchased for weeks. Ha! Undoubtedly the non-stop media spotlight had scared away any serious buyers. Sweet justice. Perhaps the financial blow would finally dent Vera's defiant spirit. Sure enough, later that day a moving truck rolled up outside their house. I watched with vicious satisfaction as a weary, broken-looking Vera supervised movers hauling shabby boxes out to the truck unassisted by any friends or family. In her expression of utter defeat, I recognized the bitter taste of karmic retribution at last. She was getting every bit of what she deserved. Soon I'd be fully rid of her deceptions and delusions of grandeur for good. Let her start over penniless and friendless elsewhere. As the moving truck finally pulled away, exhaust fumes momentarily obscuring Vera's face, I lifted my chin in cold triumph. I'd won. In the weeks after Vera and Hank's ignominious exit, the neighborhood gossip mill continued churning. But with the primary culprits gone, intrigue gradually faded. Soon talk turned to more mundane matters, and benign normalcy returned to our quiet corner of suburbia. Neil and I gradually adjusted back to our familiar routines free of toxic drama. With our backyard now a serene vista instead of an anxiety minefield, my guarded hypervigilance eased. I took smug satisfaction seeing new friendly neighbors move into Vera's former house, restoring community spirit. One afternoon while gardening, I made casual small talk with them about selecting new fence plants without the old electrical complications. Goodness, We'd heard rumors the previous residents were problematic, the wife said, eyes round. Something about stealing utilities? How dreadful for you! I smiled blandly, holding off from fueling rumors. Let the Vera debacle fade fully into the past now. That night I sorted through old papers and spotted evidence records from the wire fraud case. I paused, Vera and Hank's embittered faces flashing through my mind. Then I firmly shoved the papers in the shredder. Piece by piece, I disposed of the last lingering vestiges of their existence cluttering my orderly world. Soon I could close the book on that chapter for good. With them off, reinventing themselves elsewhere, I finally had closure. Meanwhile, Neil seemed to relax as well, now that his parents were safely out of legal jeopardy and time had passed since the arrest scandals. We settled fully back into familiar routines. After returning from his teaching job one day, Neil wrapped me in a grateful hug. I'm glad we can just focus on us again. No more disputes interfering with enjoying each moment together. I squeezed him back happily, the past year's stresses dissipating further. Harmony was worth far more than any revenge. To celebrate leaving toxicity behind, I indulged in purchasing a long-coveted, rare French dessert I'd bookmarked, symbolic of restoring sweetness to life. The $200 price barely dented savings bolstered from an electricity bill back to normal. One morning, soon after, I walked outside to get the mail and paused, seeing an unfamiliar envelope addressed simply, "To my daughter-in-law." I froze. Vera? How dare she contact me after everything? Hands shaking slightly, I tore the envelope open. Inside, I found a brief note in shaky handwriting. Lena, I owe you the deepest apology for betrayal that cannot be forgiven. I pray you've found peace. I will not contact or return again. Instead of vindication, a surprising emotion lanced through me. Shame. Because this single conciliatory letter conveyed more authentic remorse than all Vera's tearful drama ever had. I tried justifying my retaliation campaign. She'd brought it on herself. But remembering Vera's broken expression as she drove away in defeat, had getting even truly brought me satisfaction either? Had I become the very monster I hated in her? At that moment, Neil walked up behind me. What's wrong, honey? Wordlessly, I handed him the letter. As he read, eyebrows furrowing worriedly, my high moral ground suddenly felt much less secure. Yes, Vera and Hank had acted despicably out of misguided self-interest. But did everyone, even the lowest scoundrel, not deserve redemption someday? Perhaps in banishing Vera so ruthlessly, I had strayed farthest of all from basic human decency. What truly separated my hardball tactics from her manipulations in the end? Weeks later, the matter still pestered my conscience. To clear the air fully, I knew hard conversations remained. One night at dinner, I broke the heavy silence. Do you ever regret how forcefully we handled things with your parents? Neil blinked, hesitating thoughtfully. I just wish communications had stayed more civil on all sides. My face flushed hot with remorse. I shouldn't have kept escalating vengefully. Can you forgive me? I held my breath. Neil smiled gently, taking my hands in his. Of course. Let's leave recrimination buried in the past now where it belongs. The relief of reconciliation washed over me. I still had much self-reflection yet ahead on temperance and compassion. But together, Neil and I would find our way towards better understandings. As we embraced lovingly, I let go fully of the last bitter remnants of score-settling resentment I'd clung to so fiercely. What mattered most was choosing each day to see the best, not the worst, in those around me, including myself.